Okay, so we will kick off. Good evening and welcome everybody. Welcome to our event this evening, which is entitled Positive Disruption, Future Trends in Healthcare Innovation. My name is Dan Rogers. I'm Head of Education at Tangent, Trinity's Ideas Workspace. That's the innovation hub within Trinity College. This evening, we're joined by Professor Dan Maher, who's Adjunct Associate Professor in the School of Medicine at Trinity College. Tanya Mulcahy, who's the Interim Director at Health Innovation Hub Ireland, and Geraldine Lavin, who is Education and Learning Consultant and Tangent Mentor and Program Contributor. So welcome to all our panel members this evening. Delighted to have you here. Looking forward to a lively discussion. So this evening we'll be discussing the trends in healthcare nationally and internationally, including some of the challenges and how innovation can be potentially a key driver of solutions to some of those challenges. So looking forward to some engaged discussion. So maybe just to mention also that as well as the discussion that will be happening amongst the panel members, we really welcome questions and contributions, comments from those attending the session virtually. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to respond in due course. So maybe we'll kick off. So to begin with, maybe just to consider, as many of us will be aware, healthcare is such a multidisciplinary sector. It's multifaceted and it's complex. And I suppose our subject tonight really is around healthcare innovation. And the first question I really have that I'm going to put to our panel would be, what appetite currently exists within the sector for innovation? So what appetite do we see out there for innovation within healthcare? And I might come to yourself, Dan, first, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Dan. Yeah, look, in fact, I'm actually looking forward to hearing Tanya's answer on this, because Tanya is actually living it live every day in the Health Innovation Hub. But certainly what we see in general is that there's been literally a groundswell of interest in innovation in general across all sectors. But within healthcare, the arrival of COVID obviously has been a seismic event, which actually has triggered the idea of using innovation for tackling a great number of problems. And we're seeing it across all different sectors. But having worked with Tanya, I'd be very interested, because literally every day her door knocks with a new idea. So rather than delaying more, and I'd prefer to pass that particular question to you, Tanya, if that's okay.
Please, Tanya, yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Dan. I'm Dan. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, we could spend the whole hour talking just about this appetite for innovation, because the good news is there's a huge appetite for innovation there in healthcare. And it comes from everywhere, from industry looking for innovation within healthcare to deliver new products. But also, I suppose, really importantly, is healthcare teams and the organizations they work in are really crying out for innovations to address their problems. We're really lucky in Health Innovation Hub that the government in Ireland has seen that this is a priority for them too. So that's why they've funded us for another 5 years. And the good news is that means that government agencies, healthcare organizations, and the teams that work in them want to see innovation. Companies are delivering innovation. And just a couple of examples might be that if I tell you, when I go out and I talk to the clinicians and clinical teams about working with us on companies to test and validate their innovations, we have a really easy job getting them involved. So on the ground, people are interested in innovation. Secondly, when I talk up to the higher management, so I talk to the hospital CEOs and the senior management within clinical locations, they want to see innovation solving their problems. So without spending the whole hour on this, I think the good news is there's a huge appetite for innovation. COVID, as Dan said, has created a change in the way we deliver innovation, and patients and users of healthcare want to see that innovation in action. So it's all good news all round.
Super, thank you, Tanya. And then really maybe to drill down a little bit into that. So clearly the world has been turned on its head in the last 12 to 15 months due to the pandemic. So I suppose, has COVID-19 changed the landscape of healthcare? Are there learnings that we might take forward, some positives that would emerge potentially from the pandemic going forward?
Was that
I'm
to
happy.
Yeah, that's to the panel. Anybody who'd like to come back on that?
I'm happy to take that, Dan.
Geraldine, yeah.
Like, I think what we've certainly seen is that there's an openness to trying new things. And, I've had some interesting discussions around this recently. We were nearly saying it's nearly like a wartime situation. Everyone row in, everyone in this together. Let's figure this out. Let's come up with solutions rapidly. And, it's hard to believe how far we've come in such a short period of time, where we have had to accelerate innovation, where it didn't look like we might have, enough ventilators. We had to come up with solutions around that. And there was a lot of really interesting people collaborating. I think the partnerships and the collaborations were very interesting around it. And there was quite a good openness. And there always is, if you think about the backdrop in relation to healthcare, it is research-based. There are those collaborations already there. There are already connections, as Tanya was saying, with the government kind of funding HIH and so on. You've got Science Foundation Ireland. You've got so many different kind of existing kind of collaborations in terms of funding and the public-private partnership aspects to that. That something like a pandemic brings out the very best in what we're going to have in relation to innovation, where we've already got that groundwork in place. So it's quite interesting to kind of see, the relationships that were already there, the collaborations, the international connections and so on, just really consolidating in an interesting response. And I suppose it galvanized people to provide that response in a pandemic situation. But really now people are looking at the possibility, well, we can apply that in other contexts now that we're moving away from an emergency situation and we have been so innovative. What can we do next?
Absolutely, yeah, very interesting. It's certainly, I think we've seen in the last year just how when the will and the resources behind it, behind the research, how quickly things can come about in a healthcare context, quicker than I guess we've ever seen them before in terms of vaccine trials, etc. Yeah. And anything else that the panel might think we might take forward? Tanya, yeah, please.
Yeah, I think, just to follow on from what Geraldine was saying there, I think one of the things we've found and we've learned through COVID is you don't have to overthink to try and start generating a solution. So in the past, before COVID, product development could take 8 to 10 years. I think what we saw within 12 months is products were realized within 12 months and implemented. So one of the learnings is that maybe we don't have to spend so much time developing new products. We just need to do the basics, see if they work, and then work through the regulatory. The other side of it is that the pandemic allowed us to see that innovation is good. And when you try it, it actually yields good results. So, remote monitoring, caring for patients at home, not bringing them into the acute hospital settings, using technology, empowering the patient to manage their own health. These are all things that have happened as a result of COVID, and I hope that they continue. So I think because of that, there's so much scope in innovation to really disrupt the way we are delivering healthcare, but also bring patients involved in delivering new innovations. And really, I just think if you look to 10 years from now, the way we deliver and implement healthcare is going to be very different. And that's a good thing. And it's a huge opportunity for anyone that has an interest in innovation today. The future is really strong in that space. And I think there's huge opportunities out there to, if you have an interest in really getting involved in innovation, the time is absolutely perfect now.
Can I come in on that as well, Dan?
Sure.
No, I think both what Geraldine said there and Tanya as well is really interesting. COVID is a tremendous experiment that is still going on, but there's some exceptional positive outcomes. But one of them, I would say, is that there's a groundswell of innovation coming from the bottom up. It's not all about top down. It's not about sort of the R&D department over here and very often in R&D, it was more our new product development, particularly, was a little bit more specialized area. And suddenly COVID has released the energy of the masses effectively, because nobody is coming forward with a solution. And suddenly people are realizing, you know what, I could actually put forward a solution. My solution might be a good one. And as Tanya just mentioned, you don't have to overthink it. Sort of, let's say we have to have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. We can get on with experimenting it. So in fact, many of the disciplines that we were used to in in sort of innovation and in lean thinking and sort of rapid prototyping, all those worlds that we would have been talking about for many years. In a way, COVID sort of triggered it, and suddenly there's this upswelling of interest and real good solutions. So innovation is not the sort of area that is confined to one area. Each one of us can be innovative, provided we take action on our ideas. And I think that's the one thing we want to get across tonight too, is the importance of taking action on your idea. Having the idea is interesting, but taking action on your idea is probably the most important aspect of it. And we're seeing this now, and we're seeing this at all levels.
Absolutely. I think I remember Mike Ryan from the WHO commenting something along the lines of, in a pandemic, you can't always have the perfect solution, but taking action is just as important, and taking action in an iterative way. So that certainly speaks to the process of innovation. I wonder if maybe anyone on the panel could share a success story, either related to the pandemic or not, particularly where, I suppose, an innovative solution, be it a product, a service, or a care pathway, has come about nationally, either that you've been involved in or that you're aware of what made that particular innovation, I suppose, successful. Maybe I'm sure probably everyone might have a particular example on this. Might come to yourself, Geraldine.
Sure. I think one of the things I like seeing is, I suppose, where it's about kind of maybe a little bit of a change in mindset, and maybe a little bit of a change in process as well. And one I would highlight would be a company called Tickerfit, Avril Copeland and her team who are working on it. Where essentially it just makes it easier, what was been said earlier about patients to kind of track their progress, but it allows clinicians after, heart incidents or heart procedure and so on, to help patients to apply kind of a more holistic approach to improving their health, where obviously the medical base element is still important, but also looking at improving health generally and the exercises associated with improving health and so on. So what I like about that, I suppose, is you've got the technology piece, and everyone has a smartphone now pretty much, and you're able to kind of like appeal in that sense, but you're also kind of like looking at a more rounded approach in relation to health. So helping people to kind of understand how the lifestyle piece marries with the medical intervention, and how it's not solely, the medical approach that needs to be taken. So I like those kind of solutions that are coming out of Ireland. You've got a similar one with Brendan Casey and his team with SwiftQ, where it's just about getting people in and out much quicker and in a more kind of like efficient way. And their processes were right back to our last kind of vaccine that was needed to rapidly kind of like roll out, and a very kind of quick kind of process. I've had the benefit of using their SwiftQ system myself recently, and I was in and out of hospital for an appointment in 8 minutes. Very impressive, so when you're seeing solutions like that speed up process, enable the hospitals to operate kind of more efficiently, we're doing so well in relation to those types of interventions in Ireland.
Fantastic, yeah. Thanks, Geraldine. And I guess there's also a lot more supports available throughout higher education and government initiatives, and of course Health Innovation Hub, to support these kinds of initiatives when they're at the early stage of development. I'm sure, Tanya, you probably have any number of possible success stories, but is there any particular one that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, well, I suppose even just what Geraldine was saying there about Swift or Tickerfit with Avril, we worked with Avril in the very early days and helped her to pilot a version of our product, which the feedback from that led to an updated iteration of it, and now she's been very successful. In fact, has sold elements of her business to externally. So it's a very positive story. Just some really simple ones, because what we talked about there, what Dan was saying, acting on your idea, and really, I suppose, like the fact that someone is here listening to this presentation today, they're thinking about doing something within the innovation space. I mean, having a background in education in that is really important because that allows you to go out there and really act on your idea. So a couple of examples I'll give you is we worked with a physiotherapist based down in University Hospital Waterford. And what she did is she developed, so she called it a fast track for knee osteoarthritis. So we're all acutely aware of the fact that waiting lists are huge, particularly in the orthopedic space in Ireland. And the reason for that is because everybody is waiting to see a consultant. And we don't have enough consultants and we don't have enough time for them to see everybody. But if you drill down into that a little bit more, if you look at the people on the waiting list, not every one of those is going to be told they need to go for surgery. What the consultant will say to some of them is, actually, you don't need surgery, you need to go see a physiotherapist. So what we've done with Siobhan and what she came up with was this plan to do a step before the consultant where they would be referred to the physiotherapist to review whether they need physiotherapy or surgery. The physiotherapist would implement a program that they could do now remotely due to COVID, which is great. And then this significantly reduced the waiting list because 50% of the people on the list actually didn't need to go for surgery. They just needed physiotherapy. The other side of that and the reverse side of that is when people stay on the waiting list for a long time and don't have physiotherapy, they do ultimately need the surgery. So it's just kind of what she looked at is bringing in an earlier step, an intervention step that she could lead. She's digitized that now and it's reduced the waiting list by 50% and probably eliminated surgery for at least 30% of that cohort. So it's a simple idea that she acted on. And I think that's what I'd encourage people to do. Look at a simple idea. If you have an idea in your head, put it down on paper, come chat to the guys, you guys do this course, which will help you, I think, really to really build on your expertise and ability to develop. There are so many ideas out there and they don't have to be really complicated one to have an impact.
Super, thanks, Tanya. And on that note, where good ideas come from? I'm just conscious that sometimes the user of a particular service can see the challenges and maybe identify ways of doing things better. So, and then sometimes when we talk about healthcare innovation, we often think it's got to be somebody with a healthcare background. Do you have a view on that?
Is that to me or to everyone? Sorry.
Yeah, to yourself, Tanya.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have great fun chatting to my kids actually and saying, and this applies to everything. What problem do you have every day that you need to solve? So if you just go by that, doesn't matter if you're, what level you're working within the healthcare system, if you're a patient or if you're in a carer, if there's something you see that's a problem and you think you could actually solve it, you could. It doesn't matter what level you're at. What's really helpful though is if you try to develop that from an idea into a product or a solution, it helps to have a little bit of a background to give you that confidence to go out there and get people involved in developing it further. So, we're here to talk about the innovations in healthcare and disruptive healthcare, but having a short program like this behind you will really help you bring you to the next step to deliver on that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we would always encourage in Tangent on any of the programs that we run is that people who work together on the development of their ideas, that they work with people who've got complementary skill sets to their own, and that can really help in bringing an idea forward. Very good. Dan, I might come to you next. What did I talk about the culture of innovation and how we can really foster a culture of innovation within the health service? What would be your view on how to approach this, maybe how it's currently approached, and maybe how you would like to see it done going forward in the future?
Yeah, no, thank you, Dan. Yeah, look, that's actually a very important question, and this whole idea of a culture of innovation in any organization, there are kind of a can-do, will-do, future-oriented organizations in general that really have embraced innovation internally. Now, when we get to healthcare, and we're talking about healthcare now as opposed to, let's say, a healthcare sort of medical device manufacturer or pharma, I'm talking about literally the healthcare professionals delivering healthcare. One of the challenges that historically has been there is that there has been hierarchies and well understood protocols and how things get done. And rather than it being about innovation, it's been about standard practice. And unfortunately, when we talk about disruptions in innovation, if you check the word disruption innovation, it's usually some sort of technological disruption, some sort of new ideas come through, which we're starting to adopt at various levels. But the disruption we're talking about that has happened in healthcare was that sort of seismic impact of COVID, where in fact our whole lives have been disrupted and we've had to rearrange our thinking. So one of the first things in innovation, of course, is the user centricity, focusing on the user. And in healthcare, that of course tends to be clearly the patient, but around that patient, we have the doctor, we have even the patient family, etc. So that has changed the mechanism, because whenever you are limited in your resources, let's say your top surgeon, as we mentioned, or your top sort of nursing staff, or your top MRI machine or whatever, whenever there is a resource that's actually limiting production, we tend to map things a little bit around it, and we sometimes forget the pathway and the journey of the user. And in COVID, because we're literally stopped and people had to effectively get off the trolleys and go back outside the hospital and we start again, we've actually had a chance to rethink it. And part of that rethinking, for example, Tanya had mentioned physiotherapy, and we've had physiotherapists on our program. And I suppose one of the learnings for me was that physiotherapy, in a way, wasn't always the hands-on aspect of it. In fact, the hands-on part of physio was actually a small proportion. So there are many other aspects of physio that can be taken care of effectively in cyberspace and in how you organize yourself. So whenever we have, and we often think of healthcare as that sort of hands-on, where we really are having the patient in front of us and so on, that is a very important aspect, but it's not the only aspect, and we can reorganize. So fostering a culture of innovation is critically important, and the way we approach it, and certainly within the healthcare space, and Tanya will be able to talk about this professionally from what we actually do, but just kind of as a big backdrop to it, we've seen sort of three different trends. One was people, and in fact, I see one of the questions in the chat line on this as well. This idea of people from outside the health service not knowing how to approach it and sort of get their ideas tested. And we've addressed that, and Tanya will be able to talk about how we've done that. The second and the most important one, and for example, in the HSE, we have over 100,000 people, is how do we take the innovative ideas from inside and get them out, or get them sort of socialized, get people working on them, people taking action on them. And again, that's the culture we want to allow people to consider bringing innovation forward, certainly inside the healthcare. And the third one, which is where the culture comes in, is maybe you don't have an idea, but there is a culture of innovation going on. And through the education phase and the education side, we're bringing up workshops. We're talking at multiple levels within hospitals, from the CEO's level and so on. We're doing, as I said, workshops. We're doing, certificates. We're doing diplomas. There's a lot actually going on in just sort of bringing up the groundswell of innovation to kind of help with that culture, so that people go back into that world really sort of armed with not just the frameworks and not just the sort of skill set, but probably much more importantly, the confidence to actually deal with and sort of be part of that change and that sort of progress in healthcare.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, absolutely. And I think your point actually relates quite directly to the comment that's in the chat, or the question that's in the chat, which I might just, I was going to save the Q&A to the end, but I might just address it here and now and just bring in that question, which is, if you're outside the healthcare system, it's very difficult to bring forward an innovation. Is there any plans to open more competitions, new startups, and person-centered solutions? So I might just comment initially on that, because often we would see people who are inquiring, for example, about our certificate in healthcare innovation, and they will ask that specific question: do I need to be coming with an idea that's for development? And my response and colleagues' response would often be, great if you have one, but ideas emerge and can be developed upon in the context of the course. And it's actually when you start to look at some of the case studies and of previous innovations within the healthcare context, and also when you learn some of the tools and techniques, that's often when the ideas start to emerge. So certainly it's not a prerequisite, but an educational environment is a great place to explore and to develop some ideas. I don't know if anybody would like to add to that.
Well, collaborating with, just collaborating with the others, with other disciplines actually is very helpful for creative ideas. And just one thing I would say, sometimes we see people come in who actually have a very solid idea, and sometimes they bring that solid idea through. But more often than not, we see people come in with kind of a general set of ideas, and they tend to kind of get more solid, or occasionally they literally disconnect from their idea halfway through it, because in discussion they kind of figure out something else. So it's that journey, and we're only focused on helping them through that journey, how to think, how to look at their innovation through different windows. They tend to look at it through their own personal kind of maybe passionate window, and we'd like to get them to look through it through other stakeholder windows as well. And that's one of the learnings that comes out of it. So yes, if they have an idea and if they're really wedded to that particular idea, I think they can certainly come through. But that's not what we see. The majority of people have ideas, but they haven't locked in on them, and then they do develop ideas as they're going along because of collaboration and because of sort of new information and new insights.
Super. Thanks, Dan. Geraldine or Tanya, did you want to come in on that?
I can come in there, Dan. Yeah, exactly as it's been said. Really, the educational setting really helps in whatever context works. And with the postgrad cert in healthcare innovation, I think what we tend to be doing with people is, I suppose, highlighting what they already know, and they tend to know more than they think. And the course tends to give them some confidence around that. But we tend to introduce a process and bring them through a process so that they interrogate the idea and bring it through a process, whether it's their original idea or they develop a new idea. Or even, I suppose, the approach that we took in designing the program was to introduce kind of various different healthcare trends, so that they got to look at those and got to see the possibility of what they could build around it. So even to disassociate from what you already know, associate with a new team of people, and you get so much out of that in terms of understanding, but then introducing a lot of different techniques so that you are patient-centered, for example, in relation to the ideas, that you start to see it from the service user's point of view. You start to understand the patient journey, you start to understand the user experience and the whole spectrum of user experience. So I did mention smartphones earlier, but not everyone has a smartphone. So when we're talking about the technology, I think about the people who don't have smartphones, who still have their landlines, who might have difficulty, in terms of movement to get in and out of hospital, might have the fear in relation to being in an acute hospital setting. And there's a whole myriad of different things around that. So, through various different projects on the course, people kind of conventional thinking is challenged, which I think kind of like works in quite an interesting way, because you're starting to kind of just see it from, as Dan was saying earlier, the different stakeholders, understanding, who you prioritize when, how you do a stakeholder analysis, how you extract the best insights out of the patient experience, particularly when you have to consider patients might not be in the best place to be able to kind of feed back that information. So the alternatives there in terms of understanding the patient. So coming at it with, I suppose, a whole array of different tools, so that it gives people a toolkit to look at things in a different way and to bring them along their creative and innovative journey, so that when they're coming out of the course or any other kind of educational experience that's available, there's programs like New Frontiers available, there's various different accelerator programs that people can kind of like look at, that when you're coming out of any of those experiences, you just feel more confident in terms of moving yourself along in terms of that innovation journey you've chosen to go on.
Sure. Thank you, Geraldine. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think the analogy we often use in Tangent is the journey of an idea. which can, the seed of which is sometimes planted on an education program, but then there's follow-on opportunities in terms of potentially progression from the likes of the cert in healthcare innovation, potentially to further study. Obviously, there's the diploma run by the School of Medicine, but there's also incubation and acceleration programs run by Tangent, and there's kind of multiple pathways that people can potentially go on to develop and build upon an idea. I think that's kind of a nice segue into the skill sets that we think might be required. I suppose one of the things that if we look at what's common to all Tangent programs, would be a sort of an experiential learning environment and giving people the opportunity to develop skills, but also to apply those skills in the context of the course on, for example, real life projects where they can actually have an impact on the outcome of a given challenge that's faced potentially by an external organization. So thus applying specific skills. So maybe first question I'd like to pose is what are the skills that we feel are important in order to be able to innovate? And you touched a little bit on them, some of them, Geraldine, around sort of stakeholder analysis and developing insights. And Dan, you mentioned user centricity. What do we think are the key skills? If I want to be an innovator within the healthcare or health service, what are the skills I need to develop? Maybe I might come to you, Tanya, initially, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, I suppose my experiences, and look, we've had probably more than 500 ideas kind of on our systems in over the last number of years. The one thing that I always talk to people about is sort of why did it take you so long to get this going? Because a lot of them will have had this idea for a long time, and the biggest thing is confidence. It is their it's almost imposter syndrome. They're not sure that they are an innovator. They're not sure that they've got the right idea, and they don't know where to go next. So what I think is really valuable is to be in a position such as doing one of these programs where you have almost got a safe space to try out ideas, to get feedback on the best way to do it, to understand the processes and the ways to move along an innovation pathway from idea all the way to product or service, so that you can build on that confidence. You kind of eliminate the fear, because in fact, at the end of one of these, you actually know more than most people in terms of the innovation pathway. So what the skills people need, I think, is to learn the basics in a safe environment like a program like this, so that they can then go in and with confidence work with the teams in any location, whether it's in industry or in a healthcare setting, multidisciplinary teams, with the knowledge that they know how to do this and they're armed with those tools. So it's confidence and learning, and I think it's important to have those. Of course, the idea helps too.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Confidence is an interesting one. It's one that comes up again and again. A great idea is difficult, I suppose, to develop and broaden out if you're lacking the confidence potentially to do that. And I think that safe space can certainly be created within the learning environment, because everybody to some degree is at the same level in terms of exploring the concepts of innovation and entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship. So certainly there's an element of risk taking there, but a safe space to potentially to fail as well and to learn from that. In terms of skills, Dan, would you like to comment? Oh, you're just on mute there, Dan.
No, thank you, Dan. Absolutely. I think we've covered a lot of maybe the key skill in terms of delivering that sort of level of confidence. But I think the one thing I would like to say is that firstly, when people are very interested in innovation, there's a little fear factor, which is that I have to come up with a big idea. I have to be inventive. I have to be the next Einstein, etc. When in fact, that may be true if you want to be an inventor, but it's not true if you want to be an innovator, right? If you want to be an innovator, it's about taking action on the idea. It doesn't even have to be your idea. I mean, we're not stealing anyone's idea. We're probably working with them, but it's the one who takes action on the idea that really makes it happen and turns it into something of use. So therefore, the skill sets are actually more like the project management type skill sets of making things happen, having a pathway forward, figuring out what's the next major action I need to take, and obviously having the confidence to be able to look the others in the eye. And that comes from trying to understand the problems from their perspective. Now, with respect to the innovation itself, as we say, the user-centric part of it, putting the user first, the patient first, etc., the better medicine approach, and so on. So these things are very important, and we can see it in med devices very, very clearly. You can see it in the pharma, but they tend to require deep, deep R&D. And yet a lot of the people we see who from healthcare who approach us actually are coming more from the process innovation side. We would say definitely 75% of people that we would meet would have what I'd call a process innovation, some way to reorganize something, to do something far better than it's done before. And technology, of course, is an enabler. It isn't necessarily the solution, but it can enable it to happen. So we're seeing a lot in these skill sets. So it's putting all those together, Dan, that we're seeing. But the key one is to get the person to realize that they are the solution, in the sense of they are the one who can actually be the catalyst to make this happen and get it going. And the other thing is, innovation isn't always about a lone sole journey. Sometimes you do meet people who've been beating a particular drum for a very long time. But in general, the music doesn't happen until we get the orchestration of a lot of other people joining in. And so that's something that we do try to get across, is how can you build, you don't have to be the boss, but you can still build a virtual team in your own workplace and so on. So these are the areas, these are the skill sets that we definitely encourage, because they become the foundation stones that allow you to actually build maybe your innovation idea and bring it forward collectively, ideally as a team, ideally as a group.
And maybe just as a follow-up on that, Dan, so sometimes people will sort of have a particular association when they see a program like healthcare innovation. They might think, is that for people who want to set up a business? Is it for entrepreneurs specifically? What's your take on that in terms of people who might participate in a program such as ours while working within the health service?
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Dan. In fact, it's a very important question, because in any form of innovation course, the idea of creating the new startup, what's involved, how you get the startup funded, they're fundamental questions. And by the way, there are questions where we all collectively do have expertise, so in that particular area. However, that's not what we see as the critical element. The critical element is people do not want to leave to set up their new innovation. It may not be commercial, it can be better medicine. What they want is that within the context of their workplace, very often they want to be an inside entrepreneur, an intrapreneur, taking action. Now, the same principles still apply. They still have to bring forward their project. They still have to put forward the project to a panel for dare I say it, funding or at least approval. And so that may be hospital management, it may be the HSE, it may be a sort of a medical funder, it could be an insurance company. They still have to put it forward. So the same principles apply, but they're not so much about, let's say, creating the legal entity, which is your new company, and bringing it forward in that sense. It's about creating the new venture project and getting that funded and getting that progressed and activated upon in their particular area. In fact, the greatest pleasure or the greatest return on investment to a person is not so much a pure financial investment return, because very often they're innovative ideas, they can't see how it triggers instant financial return to the organization or to themselves. But what they can see, there are other non-cash elements of return, such as clearly better medicine, happier particular patients, happier families of patients, earlier discharge, better communications, more efficiencies. There are many returns on investment, and that are there beyond what we call, we put this amount of money in, we built the black box up, and then we sold it on, and we made this amount of money. So we're not discouraging anybody who has a serious idea that they want to bring forward as a new medtech company, or maybe even a new biotech company and so on. And we can certainly work with those, but the focus isn't so much on those, I would say, in the context of what we're doing in the certificate. It's very much more on the person who's got that innovative idea, wants to bring it forward, and yet bring it through the idea of getting it supported and funded internally. So we do cover that, sure. Dan, for sure.
Absolutely, and there's always going to be people we'll need to convince of a good idea, and I think a course such as this is an excellent opportunity to stand in front of people and articulate your idea with influence, with impact, in a way that's accessible to potentially people who are familiar with the domain, and will help sort of stress test that idea and get it to a point then that potentially you could bring it, as you say, down to a potential funder or a manager within a healthcare context. Very good. So I have a question which I'm thinking I might come to each of you in turn, because you might each have a different perspective on it, which is, what do we currently see as the biggest barriers to implementing innovative solutions in healthcare, or maybe just the barriers to innovation as they exist at the moment? And then the second part of that question, what do we think we need to do to overcome those barriers? I might come to Tanya, please, on that.
Or yeah, I suppose Dan sort of touched on there a little bit. One of the biggest barriers, I think, is money, because everyone thinks you have to spend money on a new solution or a technology. But the way around that is, as Dan also said there, it's not just about how much you're going to pay and how much you're going to save in financial terms. So the stakeholder analysis that people learn about through this program is really critical, because it's not just the payers, it's also those who benefit from the solution. It's staff and how their workday is improved, how time is saved. You know, there's a really big element there that is not just money, it's kind of the periphery, what's on the periphery and how are other people impacted by it. So that's one thing. So the stakeholder analysis is very important, and the impact on that. I think another one is this idea of fear, and it's the barrier to innovation and implementing innovation would be a fear of failure. Again, arming yourselves with the tools, and just having a program beside your name will really help.
And actually, that's a particularly interesting point, Tanya. So, is it something? So if somebody was to come to HIH, having participated in a certified program in healthcare innovation, would you view that as a demonstrated kind of interest and acknowledge it as something that would help them along their way in terms of recognition of effort, or how do you view certification in this area?
I suppose what I find is that we talk to different types of people. So we have people who have an idea and don't know what to do with it. And then we have people who have tried to move along this journey and armed themselves with tools. And there's a huge difference between both. So we almost have to start at the drawing board with the people who have an idea but don't have a clue. They find it difficult to talk to their peers about how to develop their solution, because again, they're not confident because they don't have the tools. They don't actually know what the next steps are. So when people come to us, I'd look at two types. There's the companies and the startup companies who know what they're doing. They're the startup companies who think they know what they're doing, but we know they don't know what they're doing yet. Then there's the people that come in with the ideas and they're very honest about it. I know nothing. Can you help me? And they're the ones that say, I know something because I've done this course. And I go, okay, we're onto a winner here. It's going to be much easier for us to help them. So that, I think,
sure.
I mean, we know that through everything, education is critical to allowing you to develop and use tools. And by having that education, you can minimize the fear, your own fear, but also you can convince your colleagues that failure is unlikely to happen, or at least you have some sort of a sense of what you're doing. And so not everybody is going to be part of this failed group.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you heard me there. My Wi-Fi dropped a minute, but
yeah, no, that's really interesting, Tanya, in terms of that fear of failure, and a lot of it is back to, I suppose, some of the maybe traditional ideas around our traditional views of coming up with ideas, that it is this one eureka moment that something just hits you out of the blue, whereas in fact the vast majority of ideas that progress into really good applications within an existing business or as a new startup is as a result of a very steady effort to bring that idea forward. There isn't the eureka moment, there's the gem of an idea and then all the work that goes in behind it. And I suppose that's maybe part of the barrier to innovation, back to your question, Dan, is that expectation nearly that an idea sometimes is enough. Whereas it's that slow, steady effort it's the marathon, not the sprint, to kind of get the idea over the finishing line, and bring it into a department or a unit, or bring it out as a new idea. And it's back to the skills as well, being able to present a really good business case, whether that's within an organization to get people to come on board with an idea, which might be cost neutral. There might be no budget need. It's just a willingness for people to try out something new, try a different way or a different process of doing something. It may be that it requires budget. And again, you're making the business case, but you're back to what Tanya was saying. It's not just necessarily what you're looking at, in terms of kind of pure costs, but it may be like time saving, or the people's efforts can be put in a different direction, or it's a better patient experience. And you're looking at everything that goes into that. So what is that brings you along that kind of journey in terms of breaking down those barriers to innovation? That maybe it isn't a cost. Maybe it's that you can do better research as a result of educating yourself to kind of understand better what it's like to be in the patient's shoes, that you understand better maybe what it's like to be in other stakeholders' shoes, and medical professionals, they haven't had an easy time of it, showing understanding in relation to that and appreciating that in terms of bringing something forward, doing really good secondary research, and again, attaching yourself to a program like the Postgraduate in Healthcare Innovation, gives you access to all of the secondary resources, and amazing kind of databases that people don't even know exist, that are available through the library in Trinity. Really helpful to be able to get access to that and marry that with your primary research and your understanding in relation to the patient experience and the wider experience. I think it was Dan that mentioned that it's not just necessarily about the patient, but the wider family group as well, that need to be kind of like considered sometimes also. So having all of that in place kind of helps break down some of those kind of traditional barriers that we would see.
Thanks very much, Geraldine. Yeah, I see implementation as coming through as a common theme from across the panel. I'm reminded of 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. That an idea is great, but actually it's what you do with it that's going to count. Dan, I might come to you on the barriers. If you have anything to add on that front, and then what your solutions or how you might overcome them.
The barriers, yeah. I think Tanya actually started by mentioning one, because money is always presented as the barrier. Actually, whenever you deal with a person, they'll always come to the conclusion, and every time you work in a large organization and you ask people for a solution, they'll always say, I have a perfect solution. Now, if you just give me this amount of money, I will hire this person. And in other words, they always see money as sort of making it happen. And yet, some of the greatest innovations come about when you take money away, when the tide goes out, not when the tide comes in, when the tide goes out and people are forced to actually rethink. Because usually when money is added, all we're doing is we're keeping the status quo and we're kind of expanding forward in some sort of front part of it. But we're not changing it radically. We're not rethinking. We're not doing self-cannibalization on our ideas. We're not sort of changing it. So actually money is one of the more interesting things in terms of when you actually reduce it, you actually are forced to think creatively. How will we respond? Now, if your response is, oh, we're down 10%, so let's get rid of 10% of everything. Well, that's clearly not thinking innovatively, right? So certainly money from my perspective is the last thing you should think about with respect to your innovation. First, you think about what is our objective? What are we really trying to do? Why is this new status quo? Because the status quo is the biggest barrier, by the way, usually. But when you get to this new status quo, when your idea is going to be implemented and the world's going to be a better place, what's it going to look like? And then once we figure that out, we're figuring out the journey. And then with that journey, we're figuring out how much it would take in terms of what I'd call petrol in the tank to get there. And the whole purpose of money is to actually get there. It's not in itself anything other than that sort of lubrication to really bring us forward. So I think we need to think about it. So the biggest barrier, Dan, ironically, actually is the status quo, the way we've done it in the past. And until we had COVID, we didn't have that sort of seismic upset that actually allowed everybody to rethink. Why? Because everybody had to go home. Everybody suddenly is working from home offices. Everybody who is sort of in a face-to-face situation is saying, can I handle it online? Everybody who's managing queues is trying to now manage them electronically. And so, you know, these things have certainly made the change. But certainly those are certain barriers that we see. They've always been there, Dan. But I think COVID has actually opened the door for people to rethink. And so I think most people would agree now, since we don't know what the post-COVID world looks like, but I think most people will agree that it's unlikely to be absolutely back to the former status quo. I think it'll be a blended version of some of the good things we learned in COVID and so on. So that would be my number one barrier, Dan. And then the second one is complacency in the mind of the individual. Now, what I mean by that is, and I have to be careful how I phrase this, right? But, you know, all of us have known very good people in our lives, and we've met them maybe earlier in our career. These were really good people. And then maybe 10 years later, 15 years later, maybe 20 years later, we meet them again, and they're in some sort of middle role, and suddenly they become very conservative. Suddenly that kind of innovative drive that we used to remember is sort of quenched, right? And normally we'd walk away. But what I've learned, particularly in the healthcare innovation, when we're dealing with large organizations now, is we got to rekindle. We got to rekindle that sort of idea that they actually had, because there are really good people out there who have sort of, you know, slowly kind of atrophied in a way in terms of their kind of interests, but we can rekindle that. And so that's actually happening now, because when I can say that when Tanya started out X years ago with the Health Innovation Hub, when it was just kind of a very small nucleus, the ambition was there to sort of bring in thing. Now what we're seeing, Tanya mentioned, we've seen 500 or more sort of projects coming out. We've seen more, and on the healthcare certificate and on the diploma, on our workshops, we're seeing more and more people. So now the person on it is no longer sort of standing out as sort of unusual. There's actually a groundswell. So actually, I have a very positive view of the future now.
Great, thank you, Dan. And I love that expression of it's not when the tide comes in, it's when the tide goes out. And I think probably the pandemic is one of the biggest examples we've had of the tide going out and innovation coming about as a result. Very good. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to briskly move on, and I'm going to ask you each if you could consider a vision for the future of innovation in healthcare nationally. So the future of healthcare innovation in Ireland, in maybe one sentence. And I might start, and putting you all on the spot now a little bit. I'm going to say that my vision would be that innovation would be an aspect of everyone's role. So it wouldn't be just the place that you go to innovate or the person who's responsible for innovation, but that innovation is an aspect of everybody's role. And who will I put on the spot next?
I'm happy to go next, Dan. I'm just going to be really simple about this and say, be curious and keep that curiosity, you know, and I think that will really help in terms of it. That I think it plays to the point Dan was making about not being complacent, you know, not just stopping. It's, you know, always trying to kind of see things with fresh eyes. So be curious.
Super. Thank you, Geraldine. Tanya?
Yeah, I suppose, look, I'm very much thinking the way you're thinking there, Dan, is I think that innovation should just be part of everything we do. So you shouldn't even have to think of, is this being innovative? It should just be the way we operate, whether we're patients, whether we're carers, whether we're working in healthcare or we're outside of the healthcare sector, but we're working somewhere else. Innovation shouldn't be seen as disruptive. Innovation should just be the norm. So that's what I'm thinking and hoping for.
Super. Thank you, Tanya. And Dan?
Yeah, my vision on it would be totally in line with what both Geraldine and Tanya was saying, but I kind of see it as a kind of that Ireland, let's just talk about the vision for Ireland, that Ireland is a complete ecosystem of innovation. We already have, you know, for 40 years or more, we have the medtech cluster, we have the pharma cluster, we have over 100,000 people in the HSE, we've kind of got world-class medicine, we have some sort of leading scientists, we have Science Foundation Ireland, we have a lot of R&D going on. And then in that sort of mix, this whole area of innovation and entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship is percolated with all the ancillary services that go with it, which, you know, include consultancies, include financing systems, include intellectual property management. There's this whole ecosystem that we're building. And I think Ireland is already and will continue to be a major player in healthcare innovation and can bring, we're really good in Ireland at bringing things outward and so on. So I think that is there. But the final thing I'd say on it is that for me, innovation is kind of like a human carrier activity, right? So in order for it, we have to have those human characters who are sort of navigating in that ecosystem, who are really bringing it forward. And that sort of resonates with what both Geraldine and Tanya were saying, that it's pervasive throughout the whole system. And these human carriers of innovation are absolutely sort of mapping their way through, creating new ideas and kindling and rekindling sort of this innovation sort of fusion of ideas and making Ireland obviously a center, one of the global centers where you can expect that healthcare innovations are indeed happening.
Super, very inspiring. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Geraldine, and thank you, Tanya. So we're just almost at time. So we've heard quite a lot about innovation in healthcare in our discussion this evening, and I suppose with respect to the attendees, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for attending the session, but also to invite you to consider applying for our postgraduate certificate in healthcare innovation, which has been developed by us here in Tangent in collaboration with the School of Medicine and the Health Innovation Hub Ireland. It's a part-time postgraduate level 9 course. It'll be delivered over 17 weeks. Students are given the opportunity to develop new skills while continuing in employment. So the course is generously funded under the HIHI Springboard Plus initiative. And those in employment will be asked to pay about 10% of the fee, which is a very, very affordable amount. And those not in employment, the course is actually free to those candidates. So get your applications in. There's some information and links in the chat with regards to the program itself. Really, what's special about this program is that it brings together the academic expertise with the entrepreneurial capacity of a world-class innovation hub to deliver something truly unique. We have a combination of industry experts, entrepreneurs, medics, delivering content on the program. So a lot of thought has gone into the design of this program, which began this year. So we'll have our first cohort of graduates coming from it. So we would very much welcome any queries, any questions in relation to it. Jane Flanagan is our student recruitment officer, and I think her details will be shared in the chat. So if anybody has any particular queries, they'd like to follow up with questions around the program, please feel free to do so. So I'd like to take this chance to thank our panel this evening. Thank you, Dan, thank you, Geraldine, and thank you, Tanya, for the lively and engaged discussion. It was a pleasure to have you here this evening, and I wish you the best and look forward to working with you on the program going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dan.